is also a really good summary, because what we have talked about in this 1 hour and a half, about how most of the time some educators have a narrow view of entrepreneurship education, or entrepreneurship education is not understood in the wider sense. Many of these things that you have mentioned, that our panel speakers mentioned and our guest speakers mentioned, they're going to be shown here as well, to be honest. So our quantitative research actually confirmed a number of that perceptions as well. But before I jump into the main findings, I just want to once again reiterate that we based the research framework on the Entrecom framework. So we were trying to understand how do initial teacher education perceive the concept of entrepreneurship itself based on the dimensions of Entrecom framework, whether they understand it in a narrow sense or a wider sense, whether they see any use of development entrepreneurship qualities in their students, and whether they would like to actually integrate the entrepreneurship education into their curriculum or extracurricular activity or just activities, but also what are the barriers to that. So it's actually kind of also helping us summarize the whole project, this discussion paper. We have conducted a quantitative research in 3 countries, in Poland, Austria, and Hungary. We have surveyed 174 IT educators. This might not be a large number, but it was representative enough for us because it was the survey was pretty in-depth survey. So it was good enough for us to develop the initial findings, which actually confirm that many IT educators have a narrow understanding of entrepreneurship education, but and entrepreneurship itself as the competence is not considered as a priority, unfortunately, yet. It receives, it doesn't, we wouldn't say that it's actually too low in the priorities. It stands somewhere in between the competences on interpersonal competences and mathematical competences. And just to show you what I mean, this is basically where entrepreneurship as a competence stands for the IT educators in terms of its relevance. It is pretty low, though, I would say, considering that we've been talking about entrepreneurship education and the educators already understand the need, and we have so many initiatives out there for promoting entrepreneurship education, which also means we have to do more work there to bring awareness as well. But what is it connected with as well? With this narrow understanding of entrepreneurship, because many educators just interpersonal, digital competences, multilingual and literacy can also be, cultural competences can also be considered as sub competences under entrepreneurship. So that's why considering that we secluded the entrepreneurship here, maybe we concluded it might be one of the reasons why it shows so low. However, our respondents also mentioned that they see them completely separate as well. That was one of the findings. However, one other finding was that the educators, of course, understand a number of Entrecom qualities, sub-dimensions and skills and sub-competences as leading to entrepreneurship skill development, while motivation, perseverance, working with others, self-awareness and self-efficacy, sustainable thinking and creativity are ranked specifically high in the importance of the development of the skills for the students. Well, specifically, I just want to briefly show you this. Vision as well as taking the initiatives ranks quite high. However, financial literacy, coping with uncertainty, ambiguity, so more core entrepreneurship competencies are ranked a bit lower on the importance. That again comes back to the definition of entrepreneurship and how people actually see that. But also interestingly, a lot of our respondents did not know entry-comp framework itself. And that also shows that there is a need, actually over 50% responded that they did not know about this framework before. That shows the need for training specifically with this framework and bringing this to more IT educators, maybe on a more professionalized level. Interestingly, the IT educators perceive their autonomy rather high in terms of delivery of the courses and, of course, development of the content. But there are a number of institutional barriers to integrate entrepreneurship education in initial teacher education programs. So it's not really about the autonomy of the IT educator who probably wants to try and do something, but it's more about the limitation of existing curricula, as we just discussed right now, that it might be a bit more difficult in some countries, maybe not enough resources, specifically being very busy, as we've already discussed at the start. Mario also mentioned that. The accreditation and also recognition, like how do you actually measure the skills? How do you understand to what extent your students reached what knowledge do you measure there as well? So it's very difficult to assign the values there. Lack of time, as we also observed. Yes, interestingly, lack of influence on learning objectives. So the IT educators do not really see yet how entrepreneurship education initiatives could be connected with the other learning objectives that are maybe more important in their courses. How to supplement their learning objectives with entrepreneurship education practices, for example, how to connect them both. And maybe instead of having separate entrepreneurship education course, having a more integrated approach, embedding entrepreneurship education inside the main core discipline. And lack of professional development, even though this is not seen as the largest barrier, but it is a barrier, and we've already observed that entry-comp, for example, is not necessarily known that well, and that also gives us an indication of what needs to be done in the future. The courses that are practiced, though, in entrepreneurship education are more connected with being either elective modules or compulsory, not that many extracurricular activities. Our compendium, teaching compendium, actually, as Anita already mentioned at the start, introduces different types of delivery, different types of integration of the different modules. So there are possibilities to also create extracurricular activities with our teaching toolkit. And of course, our paper has, the research has shown that there are cultural differences in understanding entrepreneurship education. Well, in our case, that was Poland, Hungary, and Austria. So they could have been classified as new EU states and old EU states. And that's where also the difference comes in understanding what entrepreneurship entails. And what Maria was saying, that some people see entrepreneurs as this old people who just want to make money. That's something still prevalent in the new EU states. And they probably need a slightly different approach towards bringing entrepreneurship education there, and more awareness activities, maybe more funding from the top down. While for the older EU states like Austria, there's definitely better understanding of entrepreneurship education, but there are some other difficulties that are more associated with the structures, the university structures, where it's very difficult to implement these activities in general. Finally, we've, of course, we also wanted to know whether the IT educators would be interested, and the majority of our respondents have very favorable attitude to introducing entrepreneurship education, but also enriching their IT programs with entrepreneurship education. However, there is room for university leadership to help develop the structures for doing that. It's also comes back to higher level and more governmental structures as well, especially in, well, in all three countries. These structures of the development and delivery of initial teacher education programs is very set, almost set in stone. So it's quite difficult to really influence. But that means we need to also work further on that and propose alternative methods or work with the leadership on finding common solutions to integrate entrepreneurship education initiatives inside curricula in an easier way for the educators. There is room for training. As I mentioned, the IT educators need more training. Hopefully our resources we have created could be a part of that training, but definitely needs to be a more specialized focused activities that could help IT educators understand how they can embed entrepreneurship education. And there is a room for macro level interventions, more funding and more awareness raising about the need of entrepreneurship education in teacher education specifically. It is still not a very common topic on the EU level. And we all together can push it forward bottom up as well. I want to mention that this paper has been developed by, and the research and the paper have been developed with the PIETE consortium altogether, of course, but the main author is Maciej Mitrega from University of Katowice. And he has worked a lot on this paper. It will be published soon. If you have any questions, you can always find his email address on our website and refer all the questions to him.